Hello and welcome to the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast. My name's Hugh.
My name's Morgan.
And today we are celebrating a very special anniversary, though by the time you're listening to this, it will be slightly after the anniversary. We're recording it on the anniversary of the episode, for Doctor Who episode, in fact, Fugitive of the Judoon, which aired on Sunday, the 26th of January, 2020, those halcyon days, which seem very, very long ago now. But yeah, so that was the episode in which the Doctor and company head down to Gloucester, because why not? And Doctor went to Gloucester because there were two doctors.
Very
right?
good.
Yeah, in Gloucester. As we met Jo Martin's Fugitive Doctor, who we thought was a tour guide called Ruth Clayton, but was actually the Doctor in disguise, hiding from Time Lords and Judoon and things like that. So yeah, obviously part of the reason we're looking at this now is because it's a year on, more or less exactly, and it was such a big episode, it's kind of fun to look back. But also because there's been, in the last few weeks, some movement in Doctor Who and some rumours about what's happening in Doctor Who, which could change a few of the bits of speculation we might have had about this character. But first, let's cast our minds back in time, though not space, because I'm still in the same place I was when I watched it. Talk about that episode. Because Morgan, I mean, what did you think when you first watched, when you first found out about this new Doctor? What did you think? What was the experience like for you?
It was, yeah, I had to admire the daring of it, I suppose. I think whether or not you're a fan of the Chibnall era, whether or not you're a fan of the Fugitive Doctor, either as a character or just the idea of it, the idea of a pre-Hartnell Doctor, I know that's controversial in some parts of fandom. And similarly, the whole concept of the timeless child. Yeah, it's sure it's divisive, but you definitely can't argue whether you're a fan of it or not that Chris Chibnall doesn't take big swings, right? So I think, and actually I think arguably one of the criticisms of his first series as showrunner was that not that it played things safe necessarily, but that it was a little too maybe unadventurous. Like there weren't any sort of huge shock reappearances of that there weren't that many surprises, I guess. And don't get me wrong, that series still did a lot that was new and daring. Even just the fact that there was the show's first female Doctor, as the lead of the show, was in itself a huge leap forward. But beyond that, it didn't feel like that series 11 contained a huge amount that was contained a huge amount that was new, but maybe not a huge amount that was surprising. There weren't many sort of huge plot twists that we didn't see coming, as kind of mind-blowing fan moments that you expect from a series of Doctor Who. And then series 12 just seemed to absolutely go bonkers and be the total polar opposite of series 11, in that it did nothing but that. So you kick off with obviously slightly prior you have the return of the Dalek in Resolution. Then you have series 12 kicking off with Spyfall and the shock return of the Master, and then you think, whoa, that's still kind of getting your breath back from that. And then you have episode 5 and you go, oh my god, the Judoon are back. Oh my god, Captain Jack is back. And we've talked about this before, about how that was all kind of just smoke and mirrors, because the thing it's really hiding is a new Doctor just dropped, not even in a series finale or a series opener, just in the middle of a series. Just absolutely wild. So that's the main thing I remember thinking, especially after what had been sort of four enjoyable episodes, but 4 episodes that, I mean, yeah, okay, you had the Master coming back in Spyfall parts 1 and 2, but then episodes 3 and 4 had been more sort of traditional Doctor Who adventures, perfectly sort of good, but more sort of solid episodes. And then suddenly you had this out of nowhere, and it just felt like an absolute kind of gear change, and really blindsided me, I think.
Definitely. I mean, the thing that got me about it was, I remember watching it. I was watching it. Well, people can't see, but in the same room I'm sitting now, and I watching it on my big TV. And at some point, I don't remember standing up, but I was watching that reveal where suddenly the Jo Martin is the Doctor kind of bit, standing up like a meter away from my sofa. I'm not sure when that happened. I don't remember getting up and walking over there, but I did. Yeah. It was just really exciting. Like, I mean, we said this at the time. It was the most excited I'd felt about Doctor Who in a really long time. And I think it was because, like you said, we'd learned to not expect this kind of stuff from the Chris Chibnall, Jodie Whittaker era. Like, it felt like such a huge swing, as you say. Like, and was kind of out of nowhere in the best way. Like, we've not really had a twist on Doctor Who that big for a long time, and we've not had a twist on Doctor Who that big that we didn't sort of know about before. Because when John Hurt turned up, we knew that John Hurt was going to be playing the Doctor already. That had kind of leaked out. When John Sim came back as the Master, that was obviously sort of announced by the BBC at a screening, so that kind of leaked out as well. And they put him in a trailer as well, I think. Whereas with this, like, it really came out of nowhere. I think there were some corners of the internet where some fans had picked it up, which I hadn't seen. But retrospectively, I saw a few people saying that was, and you go and have a look. But there's always so many wild and outlandish rumors that I don't know. With hindsight, I think a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I knew that, but I'm like, did you though? Were you like, oh yeah, totally? Like there was another one about how Julie Graham was going to be another version of the Doctor again by the same people, and that didn't happen.
It's Doctor Who fans with typewriters. Like, eventually they'll get some stuff right, but that doesn't mean that 90% of the rumors are true.
Yeah, but we actually it's interesting because the stuff you said about it being episode 5, I kind of had this written off as a sort of filler episode, and it really wasn't a filler episode. It's interesting because we actually spoke to Chris Chibnall I think it was in November last year, and I asked him a lot about this episode because I kind of was fascinated by the process. He co-wrote with Vinay Patel, and he said to me, I think particularly because we had the Master at the start, people thought all our twists were done, and you never do an episode 5 twist. I don't know where we'll do it again next time. So that was definitely part of it. And he said, like, the point of having the Judoon was as a smokescreen, like, as in they kind of were thinking, they vaguely had an idea for a story, and they were thinking, oh, we can have some aliens come in. They said, why not, instead of having a new alien, let's just use the Judoon if we can get them. And then it's like, well, then that becomes about that. You don't have to really disguise what you're doing. But the really interesting thing is, it wasn't supposed to be an episode about the Doctor. Like, it was supposed to be, and we didn't know this at the time, but it was supposed to just be an episode. So he said, I'm just reading out bits from my transcript, but he said, Chris Chibnall said, we had a story, and Vinay and I were talking about a story. And I just called him up one day and said, you know this story? What if that's the Doctor? And he sort of sat and looked at me like, what? So he was the first person to know. And the moment we started talking about it, and we worked really closely together on it in a really great way, it was irresistible. It was something that came about in conversations. I was thinking more towards the finale, and then it became, well, there are some thoughts that once you have them, they become irresistible. Basically, like, they were doing a story presumably about the Judoon hunting someone down anyway, and they're like, what if the Judoon are hunting down the Doctor? And then they kind of worked back from that.
I was going to say, presumably the series 12 finale was always going to be something along the lines of the big timeless child reveal, and that had already been planned. What hadn't been planned was the seeding of it so early in the series.
Definitely, yeah. He said, I literally asked him, I was like, was this always part of the timeless child plan? He was like, no, I have the timeless child plan from day dot, from when I like came into the job and I made my pitch to the BBC about why I should do the job. And this came much later. Like, this idea of it being, I think he maybe had an idea of meeting other doctors, but not necessarily in this way. Like, they were already in production on the series when he came up with it. So it's funny that, like, what has become like a really defining moment of his era was kind of like, oh, hey, here's an idea.
Yeah. This sounds wrong, but it's almost like something he came up with as an afterthought. Like, there was already a plan in place for this episode, and then he just went, oh, and as a fun little twist, why not just invent a whole new Doctor? Which is, again, that's a big swing to take as a kind of, oh, let's just why not do it? Why not do it? Again, I think it speaks to the kind of the daring approach he takes, where he just thinks, do you know what? Why not? It's all to play for.
Yeah, as well. And also, in an episode that he's co-writing, he's the main writer on this episode, isn't him. Like, if this had been a mid-series episode written by Chris Chibnall, I think we would have been like, oh, what's happening here?
Suspicious.
Yeah, because those are, like, you have like, Time of Angels, Flesh and Stone. There are mid-season episodes that have important plot beats.
Yeah.
And that does happen. But because this was like a co-written by, the guy who did Demons of the Punjab, which was not a kind of arc story at all. The first time, you kind of assume, oh, right, it's going to be something else. Whereas it's probably, one of the most arc-heavy ones. And he basically let a guest writer create a new Doctor, which is mad. I think it's never been done before. I mean, fair play to Vinay Patel. But yeah, it's interesting. And, we should say, like, we don't necessarily know whether Joe Martin's Doctor is coming back again, because in this same interview, which I'll stop quoting from now, is I asked him, is she coming back? And Chris Chibnall said, I don't know is the honest answer. It hasn't happened yet. But the way she's been accepted and the way she's handled it is beyond our wildest dreams. She's such an exceptional person and actress, just wonderful from the moment she came in, the first read through. I can't say enough brilliant things about Joe. So the key words there is, I don't know is the honest answer. And it hasn't happened yet. So I mean, we're pretty suspicious of this wording, aren't we?
Well, I remember I was at San Diego Comic-Con before Series 11 launched, when the Doctor Who team were promoting Series 11, and there was a press conference with the cast and Chris Chibnall and Matt Strovins, and someone asked a question. I can't remember specifically now if it was about the return of the Daleks or just more generally about old monsters. But someone asked, will we see old monsters in this new series? And Chris Chibnall said something along the lines of, we've been filming for X amount of weeks, months, and we haven't seen any on set yet. Which, and of course, we now know that he was telling the truth, but they were about to film an episode with a Dalek, and he knew that. So the way in which he's phrased the response to that Joe Martin question, "It hasn't happened yet," suggests to me that maybe he knows it will happen soon, or at least at some future point. Like the phrasing of those two answers is suspiciously similar.
Yeah, and it's also like he was only about 2 weeks into filming when I talked to him about this. So obviously it's pretty easy, wouldn't have happened yet. And
he's got a lot of scope.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, I remember with those Daleks, but later on he said, "Oh yeah, but we won't get the Daleks this series." And then the Daleks obviously came back in the special that aired 2 weeks after the series. And then after John Barrowman came back in this very episode 12 months ago, people were like, "Will Jack be back?" And he said he won't be back he won't be back for this series. But obviously he was back in the special that aired a few months after the series, which filmed at the same time as the series. So, we are sort of seeing a slight pattern. And they have been quite gleeful in retrospect, saying, "Oh, hey, yeah, we didn't really lie. Look, here's this clever way we said it."
It's all clever turns of phrase. Yeah, they'll never come out and outright lie to us, but they'll find ways and means around it. Although Stephen Moffat had no such qualms. He just lied to my face one time.
Yeah.
And it's different approaches, different showrunners. Because I once asked Stephen Moffat if the search, or how the search for the 12th Doctor was going, and he said, "Oh, the search has barely begun." And it turned out they had already cast Peter Capaldi by that point, and he later apologized to me for outright lying to me. So Chris Chibnall is slightly more subtle in that he doesn't outright deny or confirm. He finds clever ways of dancing around the truth.
I remember when I interviewed him before Series 12, I asked him about whether the timeless child mystery would in some way factor into the series. And he was like, "I don't know." And I said, "I think you do know."
Okay, well that is a rare example of him just outright not telling you the truth then.
And I was like, "I think you do know." And he was like, "Well, maybe," he said, maybe fans should, maybe fans will see a slight development of that," or something like that. And it was more than a slight development.
Well, if that is considered a slight development, then who knows what a huge earth-shaking development is in the Chris Chibnall Doctor Who era.
Yeah. But yeah, obviously it's kind of funny thinking about obviously the fact that the Joe Martin Doctor, the Fugitive Doctor, as she's sort of semi-officially known now, as she was kind of almost an afterthought, but has become such a big thing in Doctor Who discussions. And she's only in the episode. Well, she's only in one episode really. She has a little cameo in The Timeless Children as a kind of representation of a Doctor's psyche, but she's in Fugitive of the Judoon, but only for like 10 minutes. It's like 10-15 minutes or something like that. Sorry.
Because Joe Martin has more screen time than the Fugitive Doctor, of course, because she's playing Ruth Clayton for so much of the episode.
But we only really see Joe Martin as the Doctor for a comparatively brief period of time. I think it's a testament to Joe's performance that like fans really like that Doctor, and also that you kind of already have a sense of who that Doctor is just from that kind of brief appearance. And the fact that, the big question is, will she be coming back? Like it's all, in one episode, they've created this sort of exciting, dynamic character who has all these big implications for the show. A little like, when you introduce a new version of the Master, but like, specifically kind of like a new character, an older version of the Doctor for this era, and who fans are excited to see back. And I think my sort of, the thing I'm building up to is, how could they not bring her back? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just seems like it would seem like bizarrely self-defeating to not bring her back in the next series.
Yeah, there's just, and we've talked about it before, but there is just so much potential with that version of the character because even if you leave aside the fact that Joe Martin is a fantastic actor, and as Chris Chibnall said, the way in which fans have taken that character to their hearts and love that her portrayal of that character, and the way in which she's dealt with it all, and she seems to sort of love Doctor Who and love the fandom and presumably would be open to a return. Even putting all that aside, just the way in which this Doctor has been introduced, the way in which it's upturned the established mythology, it just opens up. It poses so many questions and it opens up so many story possibilities that it would just be odd, right? I guess to not take full advantage of those, or at least take more advantage of those, because the closest comparable thing is the introduction of the War Doctor, which again did shake up kind of what we thought we knew. But the War Doctor, I think, is different in that the War Doctor served a very specific sort of narrative function within the Day of the Doctor, and not only that, but that character then reaches kind of that story is tied off quite neatly at the end of Day of the Doctor, when we see the War Doctor kind of heal and start to become the Ninth Doctor. Whereas there's so much scope still with Fugitive Doctor, because the character has such an interesting backstory in terms of, you could still explore exactly why and how she left the division and sort of color in those blanks. But then also you could move forward with that character from the point of Fugitive of the Judoon, or you could do both. Like there's so much still to explore there.
Definitely. And I think we should say, we've touched on this in previous episodes of the podcast, but there is the rumor, which, we don't know whether it's fully true or not, but of Jodie Whittaker leaving the series. If that rumor is true, and it kind of looks like it might be, because there's not really been a big official denial or anything, you're kind of thinking, surely they've got to bring back the Fugitive Doctor, because she's had this one interaction with Jodie Whittaker's Doctor. There's a lot left unsaid. There's a lot of plot thread hanging there. And while you could pick it up, that story arc, with the next Doctor, in a similar way to how, the Bad Wolf Rose kind of story was picked up from the Ninth Doctor to the 10th Doctor. Like those Doctors kind of, they kind of share, I would say, a kind of era.
Yeah, and I think we touched on this before, where when we were talking about the potential Jodie Whittaker exit, a character like River Song, her arc continued across multiple Doctors, so potentially the Fugitive Doctor could fulfill a similar function. But yeah.
But you sort of feel like she'd at least get another meeting of her. I mean, arguably, River Song's a point where you sort of say, well, she only met the 10th Doctor once, despite recognising him. And so that was you maybe would have expected River Song to at least meet the 10th Doctor one more time. But you know what? They're doing that on Big Finish now. So it's all fine. Yeah. So maybe, we won't see Jo Martin next series. She'll just meet, whoever the Doctor after Jodie Whittaker is. And then Big Finish will fill that in later on, where they hang out. But I feel like it would seem like a mistake to at least not kind of nod to it, even if it's just like how it was in The Timeless Children, where the Doctor sees like an expression of her, like there's a cameo in some way, like how John Barrowman turned up at the end of David Tennant's era to say goodbye. Like even if just something like that, like a kind of nod to it, I feel like you'd kind of want that, wouldn't you? You kind of want to kind of see that relationship again, the two of them kind of butting heads.
There's an interesting balance to be struck, I think, because again, we talked about when we were talking previously about whether or not Jodie Whittaker is leaving Doctor Who, and if this is to be her final series, it's a shorter series than usual because of the pandemic. It's only 8 episodes, right? 8 episodes.
Yeah.
So to a certain extent, you almost don't want Jodie Whittaker to have to share screen time with another Doctor, because we're getting so little of her as it is, and we want as much Jodie as possible. So would it be difficult in that way to work in more of the Fugitive Doctor? That being said, I think, and again, yeah, you could pick up the Fugitive Doctor arc, presuming Chris Chibnall stays on as showrunner, which all the signs seem to indicate he will. You could pick up that arc after Jodie leaves. But I think the whole Timeless Child arc is so tied to the 13th Doctor, like it had such a sort of profound impact on that version of the character, that needs to be touched on. It not necessarily resolved, and we don't need all the answers. I don't think you could possibly. That's the whole point of that twist, right? Is that it opens up so many possibilities that you can't cover them all. That's why it's brilliant. It kind of opens up. It has untapped potential. You can never sort of fulfill that potential of that story. But I do think that you need to at least touch on it again. You don't have to resolve that story, but you do have to touch on it again. And I don't know how you can touch on it again without bringing back the Fugitive Doctor.
Yeah, I think it would be a mistake to, even if you tried to. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It seems like that would it kind of puts a face to what is kind of quite an abstract concept. Like, I think one of the issues with the Timeless Children was that it was the Doctor being told all this by the Master over the course of an episode, and then there weren't really like any Time Lords there for her to kind of confront. There's no one the Master doesn't really represent the big conspiracy. He's just sort of telling her about it. Whereas the Fugitive Doctor does kind of, not in like a she's behind it kind of way, but she's like part of the Timeless Children thing, who is like a character who the Doctor can kind of talk to and bounce off. Like it makes it a bit more dynamic. So I feel like if you're going to carry on with that story, I feel like that would be, you know, a good thing to bring in.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right in that she's the face of that twist in a way. Because it's quite an abstract idea. You go, oh, okay, before what you knew, there were potentially like millions of other Doctors, and that's kind of hard to get your head around. And that again, like I said, the story potential of that is so vast, you almost can't. Well, what exactly does that mean? But when you go, oh, okay, here's a Doctor you've never met before. Here's what she's like. It's this Doctor right here. It's kind of like the personification of all that potential. It's like here's what could be a whole new Doctor you never knew about, and what she's getting up to.
I think she represents something really interesting as well, because I don't know the extent to which this was intentional in the writing, but there's a really interesting dynamic between them, because traditionally there's a bit of a joke when different incarnations of a Doctor meet where they don't get along, and it's a bit of a laugh because we love them and we would assume they would get along, so it's kind of funny that they sort of, you know, take shots at each other. But there was something quite like the Doctor seemed genuinely quite unsettled by the Fugitive Doctor. Like, I think it's that little, because she represents a period of her life she doesn't remember, and she's not really sure what she got up to, and these possibly quite dark acts that she could have done. And it's kind of like, there's that thing where she's not quite sure whether this Doctor would whip out a gun and use it, and she's saying no, and it turns out she wouldn't. But it's kind of like, there's that element of the unknown. I think it creates a really interesting dynamic that you don't really see when you have Doctors that we know and love, you know, kind of meeting. You still get that kind of cool I'm you and you're me element, but with a kind of unknown quantity. And because, you know, we know that Doctor's memories are going to go, we don't know what she's going to do. The Doctor's past is also her future in a weird sort of way, which is quite interesting. I mean, it's very Doctor Who, isn't it? It's very Doctor Who.
Yeah, no, but I think you're right in that. Okay, yeah, you've got those repeated mind wipes, so you're essentially setting the Doctor back to kind of square one each time. But if you think, you know, when we first meet the first, you know, quote unquote Dr. William Hartnell, in his first story, he almost caves in a caveman's head with a rock, you know, to ensure his escape. And that's part of this, you know, he's a slightly more, you know, more dark, more calculating, more devious character when we first meet him. And then through his experiences with his companions, he kind of grows into being this heroic character that we now associate more readily, you know, that kind of heroism we now associate more readily with the Doctor. Now, presumably then, yes, okay, the Fugitive Doctor comes from before the first Doctor, but it's possible that she could have gone on like a similar journey, and then a lot of that is lost through the mind wipe. But if we presume that a kind of blank slate Doctor is not the heroic figure that we know and love, it's possible that the Fugitive Doctor, could be a darker figure, could be someone who's not learnt to be the Doctor in the way we, you know, doesn't act in the way we always expect the Doctor to act.
Yeah, I think that's quite fun, because we sort of saw that idea from a different perspective. When River Song meets the 10th Doctor, she says, "You're not the Doctor yet," which is quite interesting, because obviously we, you know, then with hindsight, it's like, I mean, she was really, you know, she's really pulling at very minor things there, considering how similar the 11th Doctor is to the 10th Doctor. But I do feel like maybe the idea of we see this person sort of gradually become the Doctor is quite interesting. It's a little like that, you know, young Doctor origin story that was mooted at one point but never happened because it kind of slightly kills the mystery of the character. That sort of prequel aspect of seeing how this person becomes the character that we know, but like alongside the character that already exists, the older version. Like it's a bit weird and confusing, because it's Doctor Who. Like you can have that in a prequel that coexists alongside the main narrative of the series, and I think that's quite interesting and very Doctor Who. I mean, it could be that none of this will happen and they'll just, you know, she just won't turn up ever again, you know.
It'll happen in future Big Finish releases, if nothing else. I think as well, like, okay, like there's a kind of practical reason for the mind wipe plot device, right? Which is just that, why didn't the Doctor remember any of this? Mind wipe, it's fine. So that is a very kind of practical reason why that happened. But actually, if you think about it, there's a tragedy to that as well. This, in all these lives that the Doctor doesn't remember. So like we know that whatever journey the Fugitive Doctor goes on, the Doctor then will forget that, and and still she doesn't remember it fully. Like she's now aware of that Doctor's existence, as in Jodie Whittaker's Doctor is now aware of her her former incarnation's existence, but she still doesn't have, you know, full recollection of what she experienced. So everything that we see the Fugitive Doctor experience, everything that version of the character experiences, will be lost. So there's kind of a.
But if Jodie Whittaker's Doctor's there, then it won't be lost because she'll know it in retrospect in the way that we'll know it.
It will just be lost for a very, very long period of time. Yeah. But there is something tragic in that as well. That, you know, she's the lost Doctor in many ways. She's the Doctor that we don't remember. So and all that kind of potential character growth will be lost because of the mind wipe. So that's kind of an interesting angle on it as well.
I mean, here's a question. Does the Fugitive Doctor remember the 13th Doctor now? Because there's that thing, isn't it, when different Doctors meet where the later ones aren't supposed to be able to remember. Yeah. Sorry, the earlier ones aren't supposed to be able to remember meeting the later ones. And whoever is the latest Doctor is the one who remembers, essentially.
Yeah. There's some wibbly wobbly timey-wimey rule on that. I think it's basically so that when, the second Doctor regenerates, he doesn't go, oh yes, I know exactly what I'm going to look like.
Can't wait.
That kind of takes away some of the drama and some of the peril of it. No, she won't, because so if the Fugitive Doctor remembers the 13th Doctor, she does currently, but eventually we know she gets mind wiped, right?
But would she anyway? Would that rule of different incarnations meeting still count in terms of, like, if the Joe Martin Doctor met Jodie Whittaker's Doctor again? I mean, maybe it resets. I don't know how it works when you do multiple, like, multi-Doctor stories. In the 5 Doctors, did they remember that they'd met before?
I always, the way, this is so nerdy, the way I've always justified it in my head canon is that when Doctors meet, they're aware of everything that's going on. When they're out of that kind of bubble,
yeah,
they no longer remember it. But if they were to pop back into that bubble, they'd instantly remember it again. Right. So I think the third Doctor in or rather the second Doctor in the 5 Doctors remembers the events of the 3 Doctors, but only during that period.
That makes sense.
And that's if we don't get into, like, season 6B nonsense. But I think the Doctors are aware of what's going on, but only within the multi-Doctor stories. And in all other times, they have no memory of those events. That's the only way you can make it sort of vaguely work. So if we see the Fugitive Doctor alone, there is a question as to whether or not she'd remember meeting the 13th Doctor. But I think if she were to meet the 13th Doctor again,
she would.
It would all pop back into place.
I think from a writing perspective, I think you'd have to have her remember it. Otherwise, it's just stupid. Like, every time they meet, it's like, yes, it's me, I'm you. Like, unless you made a joke out of it. But I'd like 50 First Dates or something.
But I think it's a bit of a moot point, because I don't think, I'd be very surprised if we see the Fugitive Doctor not alongside the 13th Doctor. I think if we see the Joe Martin's Doctor again, it will be alongside Jodie Whittaker's Doctor in the main series. I know people have said, a spin-off for the Fugitive Doctor. As we say, at the moment, we don't even know if the character's returning at all, let alone getting her own spin-off. I think the odds of that, I think it'd be great, but I think the odds of it are pretty long. So I think we'll see her, as we've touched on, we'll see her as part of this ongoing 13th Doctor story, this ongoing timeless child reveal.
I think you're right. And I think, maybe, like we said, one day Big Finish can fill in some of the gaps. I'm not sure how long that would be. I think it would be a while, because if she's in the next Doctor's stories as well, then you'd have to wait.
The unofficial rule, I believe, is that Big Finish cannot work in an era that's ongoing. Yeah. So as soon as the sort of 12th Doctor's era was done, they could then do stories in that era. But I don't know how it works. I don't know if it's divided by Doctor or divided by sort of showrunners. So I'm not sure if once.
It must be, because River Song was in it before she came back to the TV series again.
There you go. So, but then if the Fugitive Doctor is an ongoing concern and meets the 14th Doctor, does that mean she's off limits to Big Finish? This is almost as complicated as that stuff we were talking about multiple Doctors meeting and whether or not they remember it. Like Big Finish contracts are almost as complicated as the space-time continuum.
It's true, and with more clauses. I mean, either way, there's 2 reasons why, anyone who's like, but wouldn't the Doctor just remember this already happening? There's 2 reasons why she won't. Yeah. So before we finish, I just have to ask, a lot of people have said ever since you turned up, they'd like to see Joe Martin as the next Doctor. And that's kind of, carried on since the rumours that Jodie Whittaker's leaving. obviously from a story point, it doesn't really make sense because that Doctor is kind of pretty clearly set at an earlier point in the Doctor's life, unless, you know, Gallifrey comes back and they have, and, you know, history repeats itself and they have kind of that set up again, which is possible. And then it is actually the Doctor's future and they're just all a bit confused. And it's Jodie Whittaker's Doctor who had a memory wiped and you know, all that could make sense. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you could explain it away. But I mean, generally, it's not going to happen. Would be, I mean, it's hard, it's you know, it's rarely it's a rare thing where I'll try and make a sort of sweeping statement because I've been proven wrong many times before. I don't think it would happen, partly because part of the point of, you know, recasting the Doctor is to get a big new actor in to excite people and for there to be this big reveal and for it to kind of reignite interest in the show. Whereas if you're like, oh, it's her from before, I think people would be like, oh, that's quite cool. There wouldn't be that excitement. You wouldn't have that kind of, you know, drumming up interest kind of thing, which is, you know, how you offset the sort of worry of having to, you know, get a new leading person in. But from a character point of view, I mean, what would you think do you think that you could have that Doctor as like a main Doctor?
I think logistically, in terms of like the story, doesn't make one iota of sense for Jo Martin to be the 14th Doctor, having established her. And some people are like, it's not been established. It has been established. she is a pre-Hartnell Doctor, like it or not. So that doesn't make any sense. I think the reason people are saying that is that it's kind of like, who can be the next Doctor? And it's like, well, we've got someone here who we know is a great Doctor, who we've only had for not even maybe like 20 minutes of screen time as the Doctor. It's like, why look any further? We've got Jo Martin. She's brilliant. And so I think that's kind of the thinking behind that. Like, it would take some real kind of somersaults in terms of storytelling to make it make any sense. But I see why people are pushing for it, because just because Jo Martin is so fantastic in the role and fans love her so much in the role that they're almost willing to kind of look beyond logic to say, oh, come on. I mean, as we've already touched on, Doctor Who has made many strange, complicated plot turns in the past. I guess it's not totally out of the realms of possibility. I think it's unlikely for all the reasons you said. But I think that's it, is that fans to just have such affection for her and for that version of the character that they're kind of willing to look past the obstacles and say, oh, but why can't it happen? She's great.
I think it's deeply on the outskirts of the suburbs of the realms of possibility.
yeah. Perhaps it's in the moat of the realm of possibility.
It's in zone Q in the realms of possibility. But you know, never say never, and maybe we'll be proven wrong. Maybe the big twist of the end of this series is that the Doctor gets locked up in a vault, and then we just follow the Fugitive Doctor for the next 2 series. Or time off.
I like your idea that it's all one big loop, and Gallifrey returns, and then it turns out that that Doctor is actually a future Doctor and the first Doctor, and it's all, I don't know.
Time is not linear, it's a big wibbly wobbly ball, as we've said before. Yeah. So, you know, it's all possible. But what do you think, listening at home? Hope you are at home, because those are the rules. Unless you're a key worker, then that's cool. Do you think that you know, Jo Martin will be back in the next series? How would you like to see her return? And do you think it should factor into the Timeless Child story? What did you think the first time you saw her on screen? Do you think she is, you know, an official Doctor? Do you count her as an official Doctor? And yeah, you know, do you think that she could carry on, you know, doing her cool doctory stuff with a future incarnation of the Time Lord? Please let us know in the comments, and, you know, or let us know on Twitter or Facebook or however you want to do that. I would say email, but I'm not going to give you guys my email, no offense. And maybe we'll set up a dedicated email for this channel, who knows. We'll be back next week with more Doctor Who chat of as yet undetermined topic, but it will be great as ever. And yeah, you can check out loads of Doctor Who stuff on radiotimes.com. We've, you know, got some stuff about, you know, whether there could be surprise regenerations, and, you know, the latest updates from series 13 as well on radiotimes.com. Until next time, I've been Hugh.
I've been Morgan.
And this has been us commemorating a day where we had to do a lot of writing very, very quickly because we need to cover all this exciting stuff. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.